Okay, so what we want to talk about kind of briefly this morning is weed management in hemp and what are some of the options. And we want to try and take a look at all the options and by all means make sure that we take advantage of the plant's aggressive growth to help suppress weeds um, in a natural ability. So my contact information, I think I have a slide at the end that also has that. So we'll get right into it here. So this is kind of a broad statement about growing hemp successfully. It doesn't matter if you're growing it for fiber, for CBD, or for grain. What is the market demanding, and what are the requirements that the purchaser are demanding, I guess, with regards to purity, and how can you supply that high quality hemp that they are after. So obviously it takes a systematic approach required to maximize quality. So proper planning and being an agronomist, I think it is obviously the most important part is the agronomics associated with growing the plant. Um, so what all entails weed control options? So we really want to take, I think, an IPM or integrated pest management philosophy, um, and I guess just backing up a bit, and due to the fact that hemp being sort of what we would consider, it's an old crop, but it's an early crop for us to be planting, and there is much to do with regards to different herbicides that we can or cannot plant, and there's a process that goes to actually getting those herbicides registered. Now, we don't always have to use herbicides when you have a lot of organic growers, and there's a very strong organic component to growing hemp. So how do we combat those weeds? So pre-plant tillage is obviously first and foremost a very good option. There's risks associated with each and every one of these, and there's also benefits associated. So we have to outweigh those benefits to the risks. So pre-plant tillage, obviously you're able to kill all weeds prior to seeding. The detriment, of course, is drying out the soil and not having a proper seed bed. So making sure that that's taken care of. So that's just an example, and we'll get into all of them as we move through. I think a very important aspect of growing hemp, of course, is variety selection. And as mentioned, there's basically sort of three revenue streams, whether it's for cannabinoid extraction, fiber, or grain. There are a number of varieties that are out there, both somewhat domestic, somewhat North American, and somewhat worldly. And we need to be able to provide producers with good variety selection techniques and how they can go about finding out which is best suited for their needs. Seeding rates is a very important one. We'll get into that. Once again, between all three of those revenue streams, there's quite vast differences between what seeding rates would make a successful high quality product. So we'll get into that a little bit. Fertility, it's always been one of my pet peeves, I guess, is reading some literature on the internet, the University of Google, that hemp will grow without any fertilizer whatsoever. You can grow it on low fertile soils and it'll do well. I've even heard as it goes so far as to fix nitrogen and improve soil fertility, which we will hopefully despise that myth and realize that hemp is a very aggressively growing plant and it needs its groceries and needs for that to be successful and to be very competitive with weeds. Crop rotation is very important because a previous crop grown previous to hemp can actually turn into a weed, a volunteer. And in some instances, as an example, with growing hemp for grain, if the previous crop is wheat and we decide to grow a variety that is shorter in stature for ease of harvest, and we don't control the wheat that is volunteering in that crop, we run into issues with gluten-free status if we aren't able to clean it out properly. And it does get to be quite difficult, especially if that wheat is shriveled to a certain degree or broken. We can have gluten issues in our product. So in-crop tillage is there's some very new advancements in crop tillage. There are some old methods that, in my mind, take a lot of, I would say, guts, and they take a lot of knowledge on your soil type, the soil moisture, and the crop that you are actually tilling. And as an example, in organic situations, much of the time we can go in with a tine harrow to remove certain small grassy weed types when the crop is at a particular stage. And again, those that have a good understanding of it can do it quite successfully without a lot of in-crop damage. Those that don't can create a disaster. So extension and experience is crucial there. Plastic mulch, there's a barrier. You've got a barrier between weeds emerging and competing, but it comes with a cost too, and that's a fairly steep cost. So what is your return on investment in that? So you have to be aware of that. And then how do you clean up that plastic after the fact, or how long it stays in place for? And then what I like to say, I guess, is kind of herbicides, which is on the traditional or conventional side of seeding. Very common practice for much of our conventional farmers. But, again, we want to take that integrated pest management. We want to be efficient with everything, including herbicides, and make sure that we only apply them when completely necessary. So let's get right into some of the agronomy techniques and suggestions that I have. My suggestion, I guess, is making sure that we don't seed hemp too deep. Hemp likes warm soils, warm, moist soils, not cold, damp, or wet soils. So seeding shallow, 1/2 inch is maybe kind of the borderline and minimum that you want to go. I would say that you could probably go up to 1 inch in depth. Try not to go much more than, I say, 1.5 inches, depending upon your soil texture. Hemp does seem to be a bit of a baby emerging. I think Perry's going to go through some comments and some data in regards to establishment and hemp vigor and germination. So in germination, you could have a seed lot that has a 95% seed germination on it and still only have less than half of your seeds emerge. So it's much like our canola, I guess, that we grow a fair bit of up in Canada. We have the same issues. So more research is probably needed, I think, to increase that vigor. We can do that a little bit with some phosphate with the seed to increase that vigor, but perhaps some seed treatments may be needed also, or could be just on the varieties. Seeding rates for the grain and fiber, we're looking at 25 to 30 pounds per acre. When we're looking at for CBD production, we may be looking at 2,500 or 1,500 seeds per acre as opposed to pounds. And there are somewhere in the range of between 25 to 30,000 seeds in a pound of hemp. So a much different seeding rate. How do we control weeds with those large areas of soil that are exposed? And if you're seeding with different equipment, just making sure that you handle the seed as gently as possible. We've switched most of our conveying equipment or augers over to conveyors on our farm, and just to be a little more gentle on the seed. So weed control strategies and fertility, as I mentioned. Again, this was a fertility study that I was involved with a few years back, but shows you what the fertility requirements or the uptake is for a hemp plant. Kilograms per hectare is easily converted into pounds per acre, and just I believe you just kind of minus about 10% or 15%. But we can just use this for relativity. So nitrogen, hemp will utilize up to close to 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen. That's full plant utilization in comparison with our other cash crop up in Canada, canola, that utilizes about 120. Important to note that we don't remove all of that nitrogen, but when we take the seed off. But if we are in a fiber situation where we are taking green material or a CBD production, that may be more. So I always, when I start fiddling with my mouse, I get run into trouble. So I'm going to stop that. So, so just take a look at that and make sure that we definitely fertilize and feed our hemp so that it can suppress weeds. Variety selection. It's just a picture of some of the trials that I was involved with in my other day, I guess, as a research agronomist up in Manitoba here. You can see through the picture that we've got a lot of males picking out in some of those what would be dioecious varieties. We've got some monoecious varieties. There's different characteristics, whether it's emergence, height, plant structure that affect how well and how efficiently hemp will suppress weeds. And I always say suppress weeds because there is, apart from the fertility part, there's a lot of information where you'll see, perhaps again at the U of G, where there's a statement that says hemp will kill weeds. And I don't necessarily think there's an allelopathic effect where it actually kills a weed. It will certainly suppress with its structure, limit the light, compete for moisture, to limit the weed, at least going into seed production. And so it's very beneficial that way. And talking of structure, there's basically, we're looking at a couple different structure types. Industrial type hemp, sativa has a much more upright and what our goal, I guess, with hemp genetics breeding is to limit these lower branches here, have most of the seed production at the top of the head for ease of harvest. Now, you're sacrificing a little bit there, where if this, what I would call a Christmas tree looking specimen, very bushy, covers a lot of ground area, but what they want is in CBD production is extra space for those internodes to get closer and those branches to get closer together and produce more flower. So in doing so, you want to provide more space for that to happen. So from plant structure, which we have some examples here, these are some CBD type plants. This picture on the left here is a picture of Catani. It's already starting to senesce. It's losing its lower leaves, so it moves from a crop that looks a little bit on the right-hand side here with the young gal carrying some fiber crop. The bottom leaves are still intact. Once it starts to strip those leaves, we just see the seed head that's at top. You can see sort of there's definitely weeds in the bottom, but a lot of them have not actually gone to seed, so it's not a massive issue. So this is just an example of a research plot I had last year where we were comparing some CBD varieties to grain and fiber. So on the left-hand side here, everything was seeded on the same day, essentially. Different seeding rates on the grain and fiber side. We targeted that 25 pounds per acre. And this was for inclusion in the LOAC, so we had a specific seeding rate that we had to follow. On the other side here, we've got the CBD plants. You can see here, this one had some issues with perhaps germination off the get-go. We've got a lot of dirt here. I employed some child labor for ourselves here, kept the kids busy hand weeding a lot of this. And so this was, probably a quarter of an acre, which is doable, but you get much larger than that, then if you're going to be hand weeding, there are some issues. But you can see the variance and difference, and this is replicated 3 times in plant density, plant structure, and this is early on. This is probably taken in the first week of July, and then this is into August. And so as long as you can have the hemp available to establish, you can see how aggressive it starts to grow in that month of July. It fills in that canopy and definitely outcompetes and suppresses any weeds there. So it's quite a remarkable difference in what the plants look like, and really when you're doing this type of work, going out to the field every day is quite a difference with hemp. So weed control and fiber production, you want, people would say, well, what's the difference? It's not being for human consumption, but definitely the fiber industry has concerns also about contaminants. And so what you want to do is increase your seeding rate there too. You can probably cut back on some herbicide options or other, but there's little or no room for weed contamination within the fiber market also. An activity strip tillage would work for weed control. This is actually tobacco in Kentucky, but the same principle would also be put forward for hemp, where you have a mat. Sorry. where you have a mat of material that suppresses the weeds and helps control and actually retains moisture too. You can see the small little weed plants coming up between, but obviously the transplant there has much more growth and should outperform. Here's just a picture, my lovely wife standing at the plots at Cornell University, where they have utilized plastic mulch to control weeds. And this is in a CBD research trial. This is where you have those smaller, bushier plants spacing on 5-foot centers and much different seeding rate. So it's labor intensive, but hopefully the return on investment meets those extra demands. This is just a picture from friends of ours over in Colorado. Formation Ag gave me permission to use this. Just wanted to point out here not only the equipment that they're using, but the in between the rows here we have a bit of growth. A bit of growth, kind of a clover that can be used, a low growing clover that fixes a little bit of nitrogen, that controls weeds so it doesn't actually overtake the hemp crop. So another method of kind of, I guess, intercropping to a certain degree to accommodate or to help hemp grow in those situations. This is what I was talking about earlier with regards to camera mounted cultivators, fairly pricey if you are looking at organic production in a large scale. This may also be a different option for you with different row spacing, and hemp would work out very good. And this, for its sort of stock structure, would work quite well for something like this. So looking at herbicides, again, as kind of our last option, what we need to do is, because hemp has such limited acreage, we need to look at what's called the minor use program. And I'm not going to go into all of that. Just want to point out that there is a joint, I guess, project between both the US and Canada where we test pesticides. And in Canada, we actually have two herbicides that are registered in Canada: ethafluoralin, which is sonolin in the US, it's called Edge in Canada, and Quizalfop is also registered in Canada. These are the different herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides that are also being tested in Canada. I sit on the minor use committee for the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance, so we have our meeting coming up next week to put these forward to see if we can get some more tools in the toolbox for our conventional growers. And these are just a few more. Again, this is back to the American, the EPA handles this. So for any information that people are looking for on what herbicides might or pesticides might be used in hemp, you can check out that website. Timing for herbicide application is about this, because hemp is actually quite intolerant to most herbicides, and it does have quite an effect. So this is just an example of a variety from CRS1, which is a variety from Hemp Genetics, and X59 from Terramax. The effects that an application and a 2X application of bromoxynil has on hemp. So just so you know that when I talk about variety selection, it's quite important. So CRS1 on the left, you saw a little bit of stunting at the 2X, but particularly at the 1X, you already saw some stunting within X59, some leaf burn, excessive leaf burn, and then at 2X, quite a stunting. So these are the things that you need to look for. It may not necessarily always kill the plant, but it certainly has an effect on that plant. This is just, again, another picture of what that leaf burn looks like. Many times with hemp's excessive foliage production, not a big deal on yield, but in some certain varieties, it certainly is. So make sure that you know what you're spraying on what variety. This is just some more injury indicators in hemp. You got the curled leaves again, not very tolerant to a lot of different herbicides, and this is kind of an exact opposite of what we're looking at with CRS. But in this case, Catani had a higher percent height reduction with basically that's Launtrell, I guess, in spraying it. So this was just a picture outside my house where I was a seed that I was carrying in. This is just Roundup whiff. I would say this was not directly sprayed with Roundup. I was spraying closer to where the truck is. It just a bit of inversion within by the house there, and this is kind of what So a direct spray of glyphosate on hemp certainly does it extreme damage and will kill it quite efficiently. This is group 2 damage in hemp and what it looks like. It's a little more subtle, but essentially it's affecting that growing point, which is on the top here, right in this area, and that's where we're going to start to see some major issues. So in closing, I got about 10 minutes left here, but I just wanted to sort of run this video. This is a little bit of a pride and joy. My wife sometimes gives me a hard time because she says I'll show this more than I'll show pictures of my grandchildren. But this was a field of pedigreed Katani hemp that I had grown a few years back. We just happened to, what I would say, luck out with Mother Nature. We had really good fertility here. This is kind of a south-facing slope. You can, as the drone comes over the hill here, very good drainage throughout. But when you have a crop canopy like this, it definitely doesn't give weeds much of a chance to grow. We had the odd area where we're coming up to here, where you see there's a depression, and hemp again does not like that standing water, so it just did not materialize. But you don't want a lot of weeds growing in that area. If you are harvesting, try to harvest around that just to keep your product clean. So with that, I think I'll end it there and answer any questions if we have some time for that. I'm not sure if Brittany or who's going to sort of
Yep, we have some time for questions for anyone who wants to ask.
Jeff,
Yes,
can I fire a question here? So when you work with lots of growers, what are the most common mistakes that dual purpose hemp growers make?
It's probably initially on establishment, Perry, is seeding too deep, just not taking care of seed placement or a proper seed bed. Seeding maybe a little bit too early at times, or it just not, I wouldn't say too early. For us, being in Canada, our season's much shorter. So as we move further south, finding that proper seeding date, which I think you're going to talk about a little bit too, I think that's going to be quite important. And just getting that plant established is the most difficult part, I find, to provide a good canopy. And then after that, on the grain side of things, it's harvest. There is a question here. What about pre-emergent herbicides with transplants? So yeah, you have to be careful there again too. You're exposing roots dependent upon. So what Edge or ethafluoralin does is you apply it as a granular, moisture, rainfall, or you can apply it in the fall. And for us, as the snow melts, that creates the barrier for weeds to hit. So you kind of want to see, and that'll be probably in the top quarter inch of the soil profile. And what you want to do is try and make sure that you're past that, so the roots are not right into that pre-emergent herbicide barrier. And so that would be the concern there. But the CBD field that I had showed you there, that was all planted by seed. And so a little bit more riskier and definitely different with transplants. So hopefully that helps.
Hey, Jeff, this is Roger. Could you hear me?
Hi, Roger. How are you?
Good, yourself, Jeff. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm up speaking after you, but I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Could you explain the difference in what advantages, disadvantages in your idea, your thoughts as far as a monoecious or dioecious plant? What would you plant, the monoecious, dioecious, and why? Thank you.
Well, sure. I guess on the seed breeding side of things and seed maintenance side of things, I would definitely pick a dioecious for that reason, because it is very, very, very grueling to maintain a monoecious variety to remain monoecious. Hemp's happy place is a dioecious plant, where and for those that don't know, monoecious meaning that the male and female plant parts are on the same plant, and a dioecious one having separate male and female. The yield data that I've done in the past, Parkland industrial hemp growers have a lot of monoecious. They yield very well, but ours compete also with hemp genetics. So I don't know if there's an actual yield advantage. I think, Roger, where the advantage and where monoecious came into play was more so on the fiber side of things, because the male plants, similar to us in human nature, as the male plants release their pollen, they start to die off immediately. The females are still growing. They grow through that pollen and into it. And when it comes time for seed harvest, the males are completely dead. They start to actually cause a little trouble with harvesting, getting wrapped in machinery, because those fibers are so brittle that they just kind of explode inside the combine and wrap around things. So when you're looking at fiber quality, you've got two very distinct differences in fiber quality there. So it's a much more trickier aspect. If you wanted to be harvesting for fiber on a dioecious plant, you want to try and time it so that it's shortly after that fiber, after the male have released their pollen, they've kind of reached their potential biomass. They're as tall as they're going to get, so that's the most biomass you'll get, and that's kind of when you start to harvest it. So, I guess as far as having to rogue fields, I prefer dioecious. Fiber quality probably favor monoecious. So each again has its advantages and disadvantages, and knowing what they are is important. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. Another question was just coming up here. Grain quality for human consumption, key things to watch for, harvest timing and being gentle on the seed there, Perry. Definitely harvest timing, because we are harvesting when the grain moisture is a little tougher. We're going to send that over to Roger so that he can process it into a hemp oil or a hemp product, and we do the same. But he wants very low micros growing on that, so he'll get into that. But if we're harvesting moist grain, we've got time, temperature, and moisture as the three things that will cause things like standard plate counts to rise, E. coli issues, stuff like that. So that's how we want to make sure that we can be concerned about that and handle the grain properly after the fact. And the last question, I got a couple minutes here. Are there any hemp cultivars currently grown as a livestock forage crop? And this is another project I did back a few years back, and it has very, very good nutritional value as a forage crop. If we wait too long as it's growing, it does get much more fibrous. But as far as a silage feed, we found it to be equivalent to almost corn silage, I guess, or better. I don't have the numbers, but currently it is illegal to feed any livestock with hemp products right now. Both Canada and the US are working on in conjunction with the National Feed Coalition to try to get that changed. There is some data out of Europe that we hopefully can bridge so that we can get that taken care of, but it's a very important part of the industry to get that because it is a very good feedstock. How forgiving is hemp in dry land for first moisture? I think it's somewhat forgiving, John, and one of the things is don't try to seed too moisture, because I would rather pray for rain, I guess, or make sure that I seed it at a proper depth and then wish for rain, because then you're going to have a spotty field to start with, but then you will get once that rain comes, you'll have a much more uniform field. And being photoperiod sensitive for the most part, and Perry and I need to have more of a discussion on this, but hemp will tend to, even if some of those plants come up and they're 2 or 3 inches tall, and some are just starting to emerge, that generally speaking, they all come into maturity at the same time, regardless of that. So I would say it's somewhat forgiving of that, but just like any other crop, too little rain and too much rain are both problems. So with that, I see it's 10:30. I don't want to take up Roger's time here. So you have my contact information. If not, John can provide that. If there's any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I'll turn it back to Brittany or straight over to Roger.